Hi, welcome. So today I will talk about models and how models are placed in the scientific framework. You probably heard quite a lot about models. You read terms like big data popping up in popular literature, but how are they used in science and uh, how are they useful? So I'm Jeroen. I'm from the Netherlands. I studied a bachelor in physics and I'm right now doing my master in modeling of complex systems. Um, I'm also into interdisciplinary studies, so right now I'm working in the ecology department here in Alicante for the next half year. But in the past, I worked on very different topics that are complex systems as well, such as diabetes prevention in public health. So my current research is about measurements on semi-arid systems, so dry lands where we get vegetation, and vegetation tends to form patches, and vegetation sticks together basically to survive. And we want to try if we can replicate this very controlled field experiment you see in the picture, where each patch has slightly different conditions under which it operates. And we want to build a single model to simulate all these different patches in as simple way as possible. So about uh, these ecosystems, ecological systems, we know a few things. We know that they're historical entities. They're probably very old, and they find stable states over long time periods. They fall under the category of complex systems. There's a lot of interactions going on different time scales, different entities interacting with each other in non-linear ways. They behave stochastically, so um, for stochastic processes, you should think about, for example, stock movements, where there's a trend but also a lot of stochastic noise around it. Well, we see the same thing in measurements on ecosystems. And they're also often influenced by socioeconomic drivers such as farmers in the neighborhood or policymakers trying to influence the system. So in this talk I give you a bird's eye view on how I attempt to tackle this problem and build a model. So onto modeling. Why in the first place is modeling relevant? So there's a few obvious reasons we can mention. We want to simplify the system. Um, we can't study the system uh, in nature. It's too complicated for us to understand. We've been trying it for years, but we need simpler frameworks, theories, and models to understand the system better. We also want to limit the search space we're using to explore the system and provide a framework for empirical research in a structured way. Well, as I mentioned, these systems are very old. Usually they develop much slower than our human's lifespan. And if we get the models down, we could simulate long time periods and predict over long time periods um, uh, without having this problem. And we can play with different scenarios. We can see what the impact of different policies could be on the system. So in order to make a model, we go through something called the computational cycle. Um, so what we do is first we recognize a complex problem. So in our case, this ecological system, but it could be lots of different things. Then we want to adequately conceptualize the system. So in order to get a better understanding, we come up with some framework to think about the system in a simpler way. So, for example, if we consider the complex system as of a bull, we want to know about his grazing behavior or about his mating behavior, or maybe how groups of bulls form different patterns. But maybe we don't need to have all the information of the bull to answer these questions, so we can look at different phases of simplification. Maybe the one all the way on the end is appropriate for when we want to simulate thousands of bulls interacting with each other, because the interaction rules would be very simple and the shape of the bull really doesn't matter in that case. In other cases, we might want to choose a more complicated approach that is less simplified. So this simplification is often called coarse graining. So you could regard this as looking at it in a lower resolution. So now we conceptualized our problem, and then the next step we want to take is to actually think about how to make a simulation, how to generate a framework of algorithms, and how we can use computers to solve and to make the predictions predicted by this algorithm. So maybe for a very simple model, your laptop is adequate. For other approaches, you might need parallel computing, grid computing, supercomputers. So this is one step you should think about. So onto the simulation. The simulations can be very simple systems that still show quite a complex behavior. A famous example is Conway's Game of Life. So he was a biologist and he wanted to get a better idea about how the simplest possible model could help us better understanding how life interacts and develops. So what we have is a grid with a lot of cells, and in every cell the black dots represent creatures that live there, and these creatures interact with each other, but only with their direct neighbors. So if you look right and left from you and up and down from you as being a creature in the cell, either your surrounding is very occupied and you maybe don't have enough food, or there's nobody around you so you can't reproduce. So you need to have some level of species being there in your environment, but it can't be too much or too low. And if we update according to the set of rules Conway constructed for this, then we get interesting behavior. For example, this is a time development of a very specific setup where we see the system moving, but it's containing itself, it's developing, it's repeating itself in cycles. We see some kind of birds flying out and being generated from two other entities that interact with each other. And you must see that this is really the simplest way you could build a model, and we can already see a lot of interactions and interesting behavior coming up here. Next thing we want to do is think about how to choose our parameters. So Conway could have chosen very different rules and nothing would have come out of his model. And also, if you choose a lot of parameters, you can basically fit your model to everything. Famous quote from von Neumann is, with 4 parameters I can fit an elephant, and with 5 I can make him wiggle his trunk. And if you don't believe this statement, there's actually a group that put this to the test. So they made a very simple equation on x and y coordinates over time developed. And they used 4 parameters and they could visualize this elephant. And what's more, they could make him actually wiggle his trunk if they added the 5th. This is another cellular automata like the model Conway constructed. So you should look at the horizontal axis as the spatial distribution, and the vertical development is the time development. So in this case we put down a number of creatures and they remain there for the rest of the simulation. If they're there the next time step, and if they're not there the next time step. And now we can simply choose a different set of rules with the same complicatedness, and we can see noise and chaotic structures appearing. But if we choose our set of rules just right, we can see complex patterns emerge that seem to organize themselves and maybe even interact with each other, like the figure I show here. So the right parameters are really, really important if you want to make your model perform properly. And then we constructed our model, conceptualized it, have the simulation, have it running on supercomputers maybe, or just your laptop. We chose nice parameters. But now we want to validate the model. We want to see if it actually is relevant um, and, and behaves properly. And if it doesn't, we want to look at our conceptualization again and repeat this part of the cycle in an iterative way. But for example, the simulation I showed you just now, one of them seemed pretty chaotic. There seems to be a bit of structure in there. But we can compare it to a conus textile shell and see that the same kind of pattern emerges in nature. So this very simple model, which really contains only 8 rules, could already explain why the shell grows with this pattern. You're a different kind of cellular automata model where we try to predict how forest fires behave. Basically, trees have a bigger chance of catching fire when a neighboring tree catches fire. And you see the light green colors indicate how old the trees are that you see there. And we could compare this with reality by looking at patterns we see in nature. This is called pattern-oriented modeling. And this is a really nice way to validate your models. And there's this research where they looked at the patterns of different scales, different spatial scales, different time scales, and fitted a different model than the forest fire model to all of these scales. And that actually made a lot of predictions that weren't expected and were later validated. So this specific model made quite a big impact on the scientific community. And then we want to simply repeat the cycle as many times as we need in order to construct a model that we feel is validated and can add to science. And this could generate really interesting results. So in the end, the take-home message I would like to give you is that all systems around us in the end are really complex systems. And if we want to further understand these systems, we need more than just statistics. We don't just want to look at the complete system and do statistical tests, but we need to simulate models, generate rules, and combine these theoretical frameworks with the data science, and just so make modelers and experimentalists cooperate in order to develop these models. Thank you very much.